Well, Michael, hello. We meet again. How are you on this fine evening?
I'm doing well, Barry. How are you?
This is an evening shoot. This is the After Dark, one of our rare After Dark uh, episodes on Critical Media Studies podcast, and we're here to discuss. I'll just keep it going. We're here to discuss once more Raymond Williams' early '70s book. I'm forgetting. I know he
70,
writes it at the
74, 74.
1974. Um, Monograph on television, entitled "Television: Technology and Cultural Form." We started off the discussion of Williams mostly focusing on the first chapter, did we not?
That's right.
The introduction, where let's do a brief recap, and I do mean brief, but now I'm trying to remember what were the main ideas. I think the main idea that we sort of latched on last time was, and that we appreciated in the introduction, was Williams' idea. He painstakingly, by a comparative view of technologies, communication technologies, and image technologies that emerged in the 19th century, he was pointing that in every case there's a lag time in their development that to him suggests that technology, that although we are eager to ascribe a kind of agency to technology, i.e., the telegraph is invented and then the world changes because the telegraph was invented.
Right.
Or of course, in closer to hand for Williams, there's television and the world has changed, and the medium has changed the world. As opposed to that view, Williams rather presents a contrary view, where he thinks that, no. Despite our willingness and our eagerness even to attribute causality and agency to technology, technology is always a social tool. The ways it comes into being, the ways it gets to develop, has something to do with society. It's the result of social forces. In particular, as a Marxist, Williams is well aware and wants to remind us of the ways in which economic forces and class struggle end up, changing determining or causing, there's your cause. Social forces and economic forces end up shaping the evolution of technology, including its uses.
Yeah.
So that was the basic argument that we thought was really cool in the first chapter.
Yeah.
Right.
Said simpler still, right? That basically
Please.
these technologies are responses to very specific questions or problems.
Much
So
simpler, much more elegant.
right.
That's
So the
awesome.
idea that and I think but that's the idea that these technologies stay limited to the particular problem that they were designed to address is not the case. What he's saying in the first part is just that the technologies that we see as revolutionary or life-changing were in fact they came to be to solve specific problems. So they are the right tool for a particular problem. And what is so today we're looking at chapter 5 specifically, which is the effects of the technology and its uses, and
technology in this case being television
television,
and
right?
its uses.
And this is I think sort of sensitive topic here, because he takes aim at Marshall.
You mean sensitive to me?
And I want to be respectful of that. But what but what it does, by taking aim at McLuhan, what Williams is really doing here is addressing the question of what he calls technological determinism, or really,
And
the
still the
question.
problem of agency that he raised at the very beginning of
Exactly. And so I think this is a nice extension of that. If we start out with the question of, are these technologies, world shaping? Sure, but that's not why. They didn't happen to be that randomly. They were originally designed to solve a problem. And so
right.
this one, he really takes up he takes on McLuhan with this, not so much in a as I read it, I didn't necessarily see this as him saying, man, McLuhan's got it all wrong. McLuhan's a crackpot. This was, to me, and I'd like to hear your response to this, but to me, this was more a case of saying, look, the reason that McLuhan can and does say what he does is because we're sort of terminologically crossed up. We're not, these are poorly designed.
And we in, I think specifically, tell me if I'm right on this, the we that you're referring to here, that we are messed up. I think he's mainly thinking about scholars of communications, right? Like, that scholars of communication still perhaps have these cloudy, uninformed ideas about the meaning and uses of technology. Is that the we?
I think so. I mean, I think yes, right. And his argument, as I'm hearing this, is really that what we're looking at as, what McLuhan would look at and label determinism or form, Williams is looking at and saying these are effects. And the reason that that confusion exists is because we are not considering the measurements, the conclusions that we're reaching are the result of asking the wrong questions and looking at the wrong inputs. So that's how I read this. And I think that it's, again, I want to sort of be mindful of what this might do. I don't want you to feel this is a traumatic day.
Your sensitivity to the ways in which I might be triggered by the reading material, I'm very moved, Michael. This is a bonding moment on the podcast. I wish we had appropriate soundtrack music. We don't. We could immediately, but I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
We could immediately at this point cue the share screen, which will be wonderful for our YouTube viewers, and get right into the fray and just go to the locus classicus, where he very calls out McLuhan by name and kind of runs through what he approves of and doesn't approve of with McLuhan. So we can go there right now. We have the technology. We have the technology. We're ready to move. But I had a question for you. Should we try to summarize what's going on in the chapter before this, before McLuhan is called out?
Yeah.
So to set the stage for the passage we'll look at more closely.
Yeah.
Do you want me to do it?
Please. No, go ahead.
Okay, I'll try, and you tell me if I get it halfway right. So what he's doing in this first chapter, again, or rather the first part of this chapter, and it's chapter 5, I think. What Williams is doing makes sense in the relation between what he's doing here and what he's been doing previously, is that yet again, he is questioning the idea that technology has a special agency and autonomy and power in and of itself. And the test case for this, and he lands on a very colorful example, especially important at the time in the 1960s and early 70s, when television was often, where television violence, the precursor for all the, contemporary furor that we have over violence in video games. I mean, this is where this particular anti-technology discourse begins, because it's the same discourse, and all these discourses. And the discourse is this: that there was a a current of thought, a lot of social commentators, a lot of the intellectual class who said, well, television is particularly pernicious because people are watching television all the time. If there's violence on television, especially if there's a preponderance of violence on television, that necessarily is going to have a cause, that's going to be the cause. It's going to have a determined effect. And the effect is it's going to make people more violent. Quid pro quo. It's got to be that way. And so this is a flashpoint. I just mentioned it. I'm bringing this back. I'm bringing this up just to emphasize that he's kind of going into the den of wolves here, because he's going to take on an argument. So obviously this argument posits a lot of agency to technology. And and Williams is kind of going into the thicket here. He's jumping into the fray and saying, okay, this is an argument that really assumes that technology has this amazing power. And I'm going to try to unsettle it.
So there's a couple of terms that come up here repeatedly in the early going that I found really interesting, right? The two terms in particular, and there's different versions of these, but intention and socialization, right? And the question he's talking about in terms of, you know, media technology, television being self-directed, is the question of intentionality. And there's a number of places, which I'll get to in a second, but the other one is about socialization. And this is where I think he takes on the question of, I found this incredibly interesting, the question of violence on television, right? Saying that we're going to, so he describes socialization as the process of sort of understanding and adopting the rules and the codes of behavior that are socially agreed upon, right? That we as a group can agree are acceptable. And the argument about violence on television, right, is troubling because we don't sanction violence. We say that's bad. But then he goes in and he says, you know, it's interesting because in all of the Western countries that have, you know, I forget what it is, but television essentially is a part of their culture. Every single one of them is engaged in a horrible, violent conflict. And so the difference then becomes, what kind of violence are we socializing?
Right. So the question is confusing because it never presumes that it presumes we all agree on what violence is, right?
Well, but also what he's done is in framing it this way, right? It's what is the intention of the violence, right? Like if this can be socially sanctioned if we're doing it in the name of you know, whatever our interests are. And so the question of intention becomes center to him. And it's also, I think, directly tied to this notion of any sort of self-directing technology, right? These technologies would have the ability to shape consciousness in a particular way. And what he's done is he's really shown that when you look at the issue of violence, that the television violence, which runs counter to what we would socially deem acceptable, is in fact a legitimization of the violence that we are inflicting upon, you know, in the name of whatever conflict a given society is a part of. So he says, and I've got a couple things. These are all over the place, but the abstract notions of socialization and social function have the effect of conferring normality, and in this sense, legitimacy on any society in which a learning and relating process may occur. And when this is so, intention in any full sense cannot be recognized, let alone studied. So I think that what he's saying here is that the question of intention is going to get muddled a bit because
yes, he is saying,
you've got,
I think,
excuse me?
No, I said, I think he is saying that he proceeds to tear apart the question of, you know, he just tears apart this notion that television could be a cause. And this is one of the ways in which he is sort of questioning that, interrogating that argument. And what did you just say? You were drawing attention to,
well, the point I was going to make is that if this was a question of form, then the question of intention would be more, as I'm understanding the same, as that the question of intention would be consistent. It would be easier to determine. And
yes, right. Oh, exactly. You were talking about intention and how we don't really understand that word. You know, that word is kind of meaningless applied and utilized in this particular case. Yeah.
Right. And then the other thing that he's saying here, which I think is interesting, is that, and this is just a brief little one line here, well, actually, I'm making a two line here. he's talking about the effects, right?
Mhm.
The effects of violence or whatever. And he's going to say
Mhm.
effects, after all, can only be studied in relation to real intentions. And these will often have to be as sharply distinguished from declared intentions as from assured and indifferent general social processes. This will require the study of real agency rather than its apparent forms. As it is, however, the study of effects has mainly been rationalized in
Right,
advance.
right.
And so this, I think, is a really interesting way into the discussion about how Williams, why he would levy an argument against McLuhan, because basically what he's saying here, right, is that we've already made up our mind that we want violence to be a bad thing.
Right. Or
Okay.
a certain kind. No, I think even more to the point. We, in this case, I think we're talking about corporate
Yes.
forces
Yes.
and
Well,
governmental forces and
yes.
things like that, political and economic forces. We have already determined that we need to stigmatize certain kinds of violence
Right.
while allowing other kinds of violence.
Yes. We basically need to stack the deck
Yeah.
as best suits us.
As
And
best
so,
suits us. Right. Exactly. That's
and
it.
so,
That's dead on. Dead
right.
on.
And so this idea from Williams's perspective that technology could be self-directing is obviously problematic because he
Yeah.
sees it as a
In the
very
extreme.
dynamic tool.
In the extreme. In the extreme. Well, that does. I love that. That sounds like a natural segue to the beef. The
Let's
beef
do it.
between
Malcolm, Marshall.
Malcolm Mathers, Marshall Mathers. No, it's
Oh
Marshall
boy.
McLuhan
With them.
and our friend Raymond
Raymond.
Williams. Okay. Am I screen sharing? Is that working at all?
Um,
No, it's not, is it? Give me a second here. All right. We're back up. We're back up and it's working. All right. I
good
correct? Is that
stuff.
correct?
Yep.
Do you want to read, Michael?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I got to find out
Okay.
where I'm on my piece of paper here.
Now, so we have another prop here. I need my glasses to read. So here's another moment we have to use our prop, but I'm using my prop. And I'm actually going to make this a little bit bigger. This is the problem when you get old. What do you do? What do you do? Okay. So this passage that we're looking at is in a subsection called Technology as a Cause. And it's near the end. After sort of demolishing, I mean, that's what you were talking about, Michael. Williams kind of demolishes, begins the chapter by exploring this question that he just basically he deconstructs, or rather shows to be meaningless. This question of, is television causing violence? So he takes that apart. And then he moves into a broader, both a rehearsal or a summary of the position of Marshall McLuhan and his work on media, a summary of it, and then kind of a dismantling, I think. He doesn't, what was your term earlier when you were saying, he doesn't say that McLuhan is a crank or whatever. And I agree. Was that your term? You had a wonderful term for
I
it.
hope
You
I didn't
said,
call McLuhan a crank.
no, I know, but you had another term, and you denied that, right? You
Right.
said that Williams is not about saying that McLuhan is a crank or a charlatan. That said, I would, and I agree, but I think this is a pretty, I mean, especially given where it's placed in the book. Like, I'm near the end of the book. I've been showing you now the ways in which this idea that we commonly use, even scholars do, the common association between technology or understanding of technology as an agent in and of itself and as having its own autonomy. I've been showing you the ways in which it's misguided. And now, and it's at this point, at the end of the book, and I think it's important that this would be the heyday of McLuhan's primacy and celebrity in the public sphere as well as in the academy as a media theorist, in particular as a theorist of television. I think this is a pretty clear attempt to bring to what's the word, iconoclastic. It's an attempt to sort of break down the icon, Marshall McLuhan icon. So it's pretty tough, I think. Do you have a comment, or should I go?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think he's doing that, but I think he's also, there's a sense of urgency. I would have thought, or I would think there would have been a sense of urgency about this as well, though, because
Mhm.
when McLuhan's writing in the 60s, I don't think that television or advertising in the media, on the screen, the television, has reached, it's much further along at this point. And I think that McLuhan was in a way looking at a different, um not yet. I'm gonna stop. Let's see where we go here, and we'll.
Let's see where we go. So I'm just going to read from cherry pick some
Yeah.
passages from this page, and then we'll comment, and we'll bicker, and we'll offer exegesis as well, right, and our own understanding of it. So I pick it up from that second sentence in the first paragraph on the page. It is an apparently sophisticated technological determinism, which has the significant, and I think I don't want to go all the way back, but I assume he's talking about McLuhan's technological determinism, or maybe he might be talking about technological determinism in general, the idea of technological determinism. Let's continue. It is an apparently sophisticated technological determinism, which has a significant effect of indicating a social and cultural determinism, a determinism, that is to say, which ratifies, you were talking about this point, which ratifies the society and culture we now have, and especially its most powerful internal directions. You were already touching on this in your discussion.
Yeah.
There are the ways in which the discussion about agency basically is ratifying what we, corporate and political powers have determined to be the case, or determined to be, in every instance, proper understandings of violence, authorized violence, and authorized behavior, including authorized violence, and unauthorized behavior, including unauthorized violence.
But I think that one of the things that he's doing here, or that he's done earlier, if you were to
Yeah,
jump back a
please.
little bit,
Mhm.
is I don't think that this, and this is why I don't, I think that he's looking at this slightly differently than McLuhan would have. Is one of the things that Williams seemed to be doing in the section that I was looking at, a few pages earlier,
Mhm.
is he seems to be saying that that academia has gotten loose with its investigation as well. And
Sure,
so,
sure.
but that's a very different thing, right? Because if the broadcasters and if the networks are getting, are operating in their best interest as a capitalist enterprise, that makes perfect sense, right? The
Right.
role of McLuhan's role, the role of the academic, is very different. That's you're supposed to interrogate this and try and figure out not what's going to be best for you or best for a
Wow.
particular end.
Yeah, no, that's a
And so
brilliant point.
he's basically said, look, you've gotten sloppy. You've already made see, I think that argument about having the decisions made ahead of time. Well, naturally, violent television is going to create, violent people, and we've carried that torch, right? Because violent video games create violent kids, and
Right.
all I don't know. So I think what he's really saying here is that in leveling this against McLuhan, I think it's not. I think McLuhan gets the worst of it because he's the big name in the face.
Yeah, yeah, I would totally agree. In fact, so I mean, that's why I said there's a kind of iconoclasm going on
There
here.
is, but I guess what I'm
Uh-huh.
getting at here is I
Uh-huh.
think that he's looking at this and he's basically saying, look, the academy has gotten lazy. And
Yeah, yeah, I
okay,
definitely agree. And I will. There's something I wanted to add to that. You made me. Oh, yeah, you made me think of this. That part of McLuhan's culpability, and by extension, the academy's culpability, university's culpability, or speech comm departments in 1960s and 70s, part of their culpability is that inadvertently they end up being cheerleaders for the status quo in
yes.
media. And that is, and he will make more on that in a little bit when we proceed in the passage, because that's the brunt. I said this is a pretty harsh critique, but actually, in order to make this critique, um, or rather, in making this critique, Williams is careful to separate the Marshal McLuhan who wrote Understanding Media in 1964, from the McLuhan, post-67 McLuhan, who became a talking head on television, who became a television celebrity, who, do you remember, have you ever seen Woody Allen's Annie Hall? That's 1977, but there's a classic moment in there where Marshal McLuhan has a walk-on role in a Woody Allen movie. That I
No.
mentioned that. Yeah. Yeah,
Huh.
I mentioned that as an example of, you know, what I'm talking about here, you know, to mention that he's become a kind of visual icon. And so Williams, and I think so one, it's a harsh critique, I think, but at the same time, Williams is very careful in this passage to separate the McLuhan before celebrity, right? And from the McLuhan, the understanding of McLuhan, the popular understanding of McLuhan, which McLuhan was guilty of fostering to a new degree. The idea that McLuhan is celebrating television just for being television. And so he's careful. I'll start reading now, because I think the passage in Williams makes this very clear. There's a Williams a McLuhan that he likes, and that there's a McLuhan whose influence has been pernicious, and that he wants to, you know, distance himself from. Okay. For if the medium, whether print or television, is the cause, all other causes, all that men ordinarily see as history, are at once reduced to effects. Now, if you're a Williams reader, you can see that, you can imagine that Raymond Williams wrote that sentence and was shuddering as he wrote it. How, you know, he does not want to abide the idea that history will be something that is reduced to an effect, and something else is going to take the place of historical causality, and that he doesn't want media to take up that place. So, you know, he's shuddering as he imagines this alternative. Similarly, what are elsewhere seen as effects and as subject to social, cultural psychology, psychological, moral questioning, are excluded as irrelevant by comparison with the direct. And now Williams starts ventriloquizing McLuhan's position, a position that maybe a little unfairly, but for his purposes, he thinks is McLuhan's main position, which is that technology has a lot of agency, television in particular, has a lot of agency in that it shapes our mental processes. And so that's a position that he equates, perhaps unfairly, with McLuhan, and that he really wants to target and counter. Okay. The initial formulation, and here he quotes, "The medium is the message." That's the title of the first chapter of McLuhan's breakthrough book, 1964, Understanding Media, title of the first chapter. And Barry, as a McLuhan stan, really stands by that chapter, that initial formulation. I'm happy to say that Williams seems to let that pass. But the initial formulation by McLuhan, the medium is the message, was a simple formalism. And Williams is not opposed to formalism as long as formalism knows its bounds and limits. The subsequent formulation of McLuhan, I'm filling out the sentence here, the subsequent formulation of McLuhan, or the subsequent popularization of McLuhan, the medium is the massage, or mass age, which is the name of the volume, including illustrations, that McLuhan co-wrote 3 years later, or co-produced 3 years later with a photographer. And there's a pun in the title. It was meant to popularize the earlier academic work of McLuhan. The subsequent formulation, the medium is the massage or mass age, is, and this is bad, again, one can imagine William shudder. The subsequent formulation, the medium is the mass age, is, unlike the earlier formulation, a direct and functioning ideology. I pause. Let's comment.
Okay. Well, the thing that jumps out to me is something that you said about the willingness of Williams to let the medium as the message pass as a simple formalism. He says that's okay. And you had said that He's going to do that as long as formalism knows its bounds and its limits. And so my question, because again, I see this differently. I don't read this as Williams being okay with this, and I don't read this as Williams just relaying a history. I think this is
well, I don't think he's okay with this at all.
no, that's okay. Okay, well, I'm sorry. You had said
Did I say
that
that?
you had said that he was
Did I misspeak?
okay with the initial formulation, the medium is the message, and the
Oh,
simple formalism,
oh,
as
yeah.
long as it knows its bounds and limits.
Oh, I did say that, and I stick with it. What is your criticism?
Well, so my question here is, what are those bounds and limits that he's okay with? Because to me, and you see this in the section that you have highlighted directly beneath this about the media as a practice, is that if we see this as formalism or media as a formalism, right, then that forecloses media as a practice. We can't have that. Unless I'm reading this incorrectly, those two do not seem to be incompatible. And so I'm curious as to how you.
Well, I'll tell you what. It sounds like rather than have me blather on, let's go to the next paragraph and wrap this up, and
Okay.
let's talk about it. Let's the passage that, if you're on YouTube, you can see the exciting highlight, the highlighted passage, and I'll read it because yeah, it is worth talking about, and it sounds like the answer to your query really is in there somewhere for us to find it.
Well, it is in
Yeah.
this next section before you read it, I think
Sure.
was really significant for me, because this is where he makes his, I think, the first really specific and clear break with McLuhan, and where we start to see the difference in terms of the way that they understand media functioning.
Sure. Yeah. Well, certainly I'm on board with that because I think this is a crucial passage. I'll read it.
Yeah.
Much of the initial appeal of McLuhan's work was his apparent. So to me, let me read the sentence and just a quick comment. Much of the initial appeal of McLuhan's earlier work was his apparent attention to the specificity of media, the differences in quality between speech, print, radio, television, and so on. So to me, Michael, that's the good formalism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So that's a good formalism.
But the different. Yeah. But so let's
finish.
proceed.
I'll finish.
Well, hold on, not yet.
Or no, I won't finish.
What he's done here, though, is he's okay with this, I think, because McLuhan is again noticing the distinctions among these various media, right? That they're going to function differently. So if we're going to look at them as forms, right, like the speech form, the print form, the radio form, that's fine. But I don't think he's attributing anything to that form here yet.
Okay.
Keep going.
But in his work, as in the whole formalist tradition, the media were never really seen as practices.
Keep going.
Actually, that sentence gives me pause, and
yeah.
I think I don't think I noticed it as much until now, because really that's not saying that there was a simple formalism that was adequate in early McLuhan. That's saying that although he seemed to be in the formalist tradition, he was never although he made a promise, McLuhan made a promise, he never delivered. Although McLuhan promised to talk about the specific forms of media, he never delivered. The media, quoting Williams here, the media were never really seen in his work, in McLuhan's work, as practices, unquote. Last sentence, all specific practice was subsumed instead. And yeah, this seems to be, I think, a danger that was latent. Williams is saying this was a danger latent in early McLuhan, the formalist McLuhan, pre-celebrity McLuhan. All specific practice was subsumed by an arbitrarily assigned psychic function. And this had the effect of dissolving not only specific, but general intentions.
See, I think those last two lines are really significant. Right.
Yeah, they are.
Because what they've done, especially when we look at the last one, right? Or the last two, right? So formalist traditions, media were never seen as practices. So these are, if I'm going to unpack this for a second, these are not the things that we do. These are not the things that are honed and that are developed. Okay, that it is, again, it is form. It is simply the container over
It's
the,
understood as a container.
right.
Yeah.
And then, so what happens so if it was practice, there would be some sort of intentionality to it, right? You practice intentionally.
Yeah,
Specific
exactly.
practice was subsumed by an arbitrarily assigned psychic function. There's the message, right? And again, when he's saying this is arbitrarily
or
assigned,
also the massage of media on our brain.
yeah, but I'm in Camp Williams right now. I'm not gonna.
Oh yeah, no, but I'm in Camp McLuhan, so I wanted to say that.
Fair, yeah. Right? So an assigned, so subsumed by an arbitrarily assigned psychic function, and this had the effect of dissolving not only specific but general intention. So there's two things of note in there, right? So the arbitrarily assigned function, right? We are now just going to accept the fact that violent TV creates violent kids, right? We're going to accept the fact that sex on TV creates sexual deviance. Okay, we are creating facts out of things because of this, because of form, right? If this is showing us this is where we are. This and blah, blah. All specific practice subsumed by arbitrarily assigned psychic function. This had the effect of dissolving not only specific but general intentions as well. So the utility of these tools from Williams's perspective is greatly diminished by this formalism. In other words, we can't see the effectiveness of the media because we are stuck and encouraged, because by looking at it as form dissolves our ability to see it in that way. It diminishes that.
Shall I stop the share and I'll just comment very briefly on this, and then
I think
we might go back to that. We might go back to the text.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I comment briefly because I think brother Raymond Williams would be very proud of this last moment, because that was a beautiful exegesis, unpacking of Williams' quarrel with McLuhan. And I don't have anything to add to it, so I mainly want to say that I think that was just wanted to point at that. I think that was an excellent summary of what's at issue in Williams' mind if one adopts a McLuhan formalism.
Well,
okay.
I think
wanted to say that.
Excuse me?
Just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think what this does is this opens up the door for him again to talk about determinism. Okay. You're in the dark, by the way.
Oh, who knew? Why? How about this?
There you go.
Better?
Embracing the after dark.
Okay.
So I think that the question, again, the big difference between the two of them in this is what sort of agency does media have? And if we look at it as McLuhan urges us to, then there is such a thing as technological determinism. But in doing that, we lose our ability to use these media in different ways. And, I think that's obviously it's a problem, but one of the things I think that helps explain this, and you were talking about this briefly, so we're sort of jumping around, but about McLuhan being the sort of the celebrity of this, there's practical reasons for this, right? So he's a cheerleader for the media. In McLuhan's 1960s, this is new. This is a new field. You have to promote your field. You have to be the face of your field, right? Of
course.
Well, the problem is that if this is a new field, the appeal of that field, especially in academia, is much less. If we're going to say, hey, we've got all these new technologies and their tools, and you can do things with them, that's a much less sexy approach than being able to say, look, this shapes the message for us. I mean, I think there's a sort of theoretical pressure to be able, I'm not going to say he's sensationalizing it, because I think there's meat on the bone there. But when Williams comes to a more mature field, I think it's easier. I'm trying to defend McLuhan's, what I feel to be, I don't want to say it's an error, a different way of looking at that I don't like as much, is that I think Williams comes to a more mature field where he's able to look at this and say, you got a little loosey-goosey here.
Yeah, yeah. No, another great observation.
Do you want to jump to the end here? Because I think that there's some really interesting stuff that we should talk about in terms of the last page or two of this.
Let's do it. Let's do it. So I'll share again. And I don't know if I have this passage marked, but I will stop the share, or rather start the share, and see if I get to the end. And maybe you can remind me, whoops, maybe you can remind me what I think it's this paragraph that we were thinking about, very near the end. Oh, yes, it is. I think I can pick it up if you don't mind.
Not at all. But
Yeah,
you got
wait a minute. I'm not sharing, am I?
right.
I'm not sharing. I'm not sharing. While I'm trying to get the technology going, I'll say that Michael, I'm just, I went in here defending. I'm still thinking about a way to marshal a defense on McLuhan's part, but you were so really damn strong on your last 2 points. I'm shaking right now. I'm shaking. I'm not, so I'm just going to take the easy way out, and we're going to segue to the end, and maybe something great, maybe a great insight will come to me. McLuhan will somehow, suggest some defense that will pop in my brain. But
I'm sure.
but if not,
I would expect nothing less. If not, I'll stick my foot in my mouth and it'll.
anyway, okay, now I'm capable of sharing the screen, and here we go. So there's an interesting moment, and it has everything to do with some of Michael's terms, some of the terms that Michael was using, like intentionality. And what was your other big term, Michael, besides intentionality? What was the other thing that you said was sort of crucial?
Self-determinism.
Self-determinism.
Or technological determinism.
And this is technological determinism, right? This is also a moment where, actually the commentary on McLuhan and McLuhan's approach to media is a moment where Williams interrupts the argument, the basically historical argument of the book, and takes considers current day doxa, current day ideas about media. And where Williams reflects on the contemporary moment. And this is another one written obviously in response to 60s counterculture, uses of media and television, reflecting the fact that the new television broadcasters, directors, filmmakers, we're getting younger. The younger people were getting there with different ideas about images and the purpose of images and different things to communicate. They were getting control of the means of production, and then Williams comments on this and notes in his always balanced dialectical way. Williams notes that this is both an encouraging sign, but also, perhaps, but there are dark clouds as well. It's encouraging. It's a new development. He recognizes the newness of the development, that a younger generation is taking over. But he also sees maybe some dark clouds, or a darker lining to the bright clouds. Anyway, television has now been a majority service for a whole generation. It has had certain intended effects corresponding to certain explicit intentions, but it has also had unforeseen effects, among them the desire to use the technology for oneself. In the young radical underground, what we would now sort of talk about is the counterculture, 60s counterculture. Back to Williams. In the young radical underground, and even more in the young cultural underground, okay, that's the counterculture, there is a familiarity with media, and an eager sense, moreover, right, this is the real new development, there's also an eager sense of experiment and practice, which is as much an effect as the more widely publicized and predicted passivity. That's a real interesting point. And that's a brilliant argument, right? He's saying, the older generation says that the younger generation who grew up on television, they're going to be passive, they're going to be molded by the media. And he's saying, well, wait a minute, if that's the case, how do you have a younger generation who wants to engage with media as a practice and change the nature of the practice?
I have a question for you about this.
Yeah.
I know it's not necessarily television, but Burroughs was doing his audio stuff about now.
Exactly now. And in fact, not to make this about Burroughs, but I'll give you an insight that I've gleaned from recent research. I don't think I had understood this, that Burroughs hated, he's writing in an optimistic way about the possibilities of media revolution throughout the 70s. But the heyday of his experimentation
His
and the
being
heyday of
Burroughs.
his he being Burroughs, the heyday of Burroughs' experimentation with media, and also the heyday of his revolutionary optimism that, if I can break through on the other side
Right.
and change history by, scrambling messages on the tape, by throwing tapes up in the air and reassembling tapes.
Right.
The heyday of it is, I just found out, is really, really specific. It's a period between the heyday of his work is between late 68 into 1970, which is the genesis of Williams' manuscript, right?
So that's my question for you here is, was Williams aware of Burroughs or people like Burroughs?
He's aware of people like Burroughs, and he is, he wouldn't be aware of the specific experiments that I'm thinking of that we're now able to date it, right?
Right.
But would he be aware that Burroughs is kind of a McLuhan follower at this point, because Burroughs is following McLuhan, and one of the first things that McLuhan does when he comes to prominence is he reviews favorably, and Burroughs didn't get many favorable reviews, but he gives a favorable review, McLuhan does, to the Cut Up novel. So yeah, I guess that's a long-winded answer of saying yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's finish through this section, because I think that this is probably the point where we can start to look at how Williams is able to say what he's able to say and why he's saying that in response to a McLuhan who really, this section here, I think, problematizes McLuhan fairly concretely. And even if Burroughs is a McLuhan fan, I think in hindsight, we can see how Williams's approach to this fits, I think, better. So go ahead. Let's finish this up.
Well, let's see how much I have to do. I know I have to do at least one more sentence.
Yep.
Indeed, by prolonged use of a technology which had seemed to be contained and limited to commercial or paternal, Williams is alluding to the generation gap there, right? Or paternal or authoritarian ends. Many people, we do not yet know whether they are enough people. Look at Williams' cautious optimism. Yeah, there's a counterculture, but we do not yet know. We do not yet know whether they are enough people. That's saying, yeah, there's a counterculture. Yeah, there's a radical underground. But how big is it really?
Well, but that makes sense, I think, because Williams is sitting here saying, okay, so we've had TV long enough now to be able to start to talk about it, right? This is no longer the new edgy thing. We've had it for a generation.
We've had it for a while, right? And people have grown up with it. Younger people have grown up with it,
right? And it has had certain intended effects corresponding to certain explicit intentions declared by variable character of television institutions, right? So it's doing things that are predictable, right? But there's also, you moved. Oh no, there you are. Okay.
No.
But also there's some unforeseen stuff going on here. What I think is interesting here is he starts to talk about using media technology for yourself. And now we have a culture that's familiar with media, but the line that got me here, indeed, by prolonging use technology, which has seemed to be contained and limited to commercial or paternal or authoritarian ends, many people,
we do not, this is the sentence I was reading. Yeah.
Conceive quite different intentions and uses. So I think we talked about this last time with, technologies being co-opted or picked up and done other things with. And he's concerned that we have an emergent, group that is doing different things and wants to use it for its own ends. And he's just not sure if that's going to be something that if there's enough of a push behind that to make it work. And
Yes, right.
we had talked, oh, that's fancy. We had talked about this before we started recording a little bit about how, if you look at the shift from the emergent into the dominant, right, as the generation rolls over. And so he said, look, we've got a new generation here. These people are versed in it. They're going to start to do what they want. How?
Before you pose your question, because I think it's relevant to your question, let me just I'm going to cherry pick.
Yeah.
I'm going to do one more sentence, and then I'm going to jump to the final paragraph.
Okay.
And then I think we'll be ready. I think we'll be ready to wrap up and also, return to your question and also wrap up. So it is from this generation, the newer generation, raised on television, that we're continually getting examples and proposals of, these revolutionary ideas, examples and proposals of electronic creation and communication, which are so different from the TV of the past, which are so different from orthodox television as to seem a quite new technology and cultural form. Now I'm going to skip to the next page. And so that's the optimism side, right? Or that's noticing this new development. And then I just want to read a little bit from the final paragraph. How the technology develops from now on is not only a matter of some autonomous process directed by remote engineers. It is a matter of practice, right? Mike Orpici's word. It is a matter of practice, of social and cultural definition, according to the ends sought. From a range of existing developments and possibilities, different, variable is his word, variable priorities and variable institutions are now clearly on the agenda for the first time, I'd add. Yet, again, cautious Williams comes in. The cautious Williams asserts himself. Yet, the possibility of change, this new emergence, yet this does not mean that the issue is undetermined. The limits and pressures are real and powerful. One more sentence. Most technical development is currently in the hands of corporations, which express the contemporary interlock of military, political, and commercial intentions. In other words, so far, the status quo, the dominant class is still the dominant class. The status quo remains, even though there is this, development of a self-styled radical underground that's putting media to new uses and new ends.
Right. So what he's saying here again is that we're turning over, and it's a question of intention. It's what
correct.
What does what do the hands on the buttons want out of it?
That's especially true in that first bit, the opening bit of that final paragraph. He's saying exactly that. So as always, our intentions are what's determining technology, not technology determining us.
Right. And I think that there's room here. There's room for McLuhan still, because again, the technologies are limited to their particular use at any given time, right? So this does this. And so in many ways, what I think McLuhan is referring to as form, or what Williams is referring to as McLuhan's form, right? The form of television does define the barriers or the boundaries of what's going to happen. But he's really he takes great pains to talk about, he goes a little further than current orthodox theory and practice are effects, right? Like this is what you get out of it. So I don't think that he's sitting here saying, look, McLuhan is wrong. I think he's just saying that if you look at this through McLuhan's form lens, that you're going to see form and you should be seeing effects. That McLuhan doesn't make any missteps other than the fact that he's looking at the whole thing as a form. And that's not consistent with what a more mature media technology landscape looks like for him.
I love it. I'd like that to be our final word, unless you have something else to say. Or
No, I'm good. This was really well. I don't mean no, I'm good as in I'm done. I'm glad this was really interesting. I think that the fascinating thing, and where I'm willing to look at McLuhan favorably, is that the vantage point that he's staking out is so broad. It's so all encompassing that you do miss the trees for the forest here. You know, there's the issue of he says it earlier in here about the effects of media in terms of, oh, it's doing this or it's doing this or it's doing this. And if you look at it as form, you miss the fact that there are already a million other institutions doing these things. I think that Williams has a pretty tidy line on being able to say, this is another tool in a very complex social system where all of the pieces fit together, and every piece in turn affects the other pieces. And I think that McLuhan's trying to sort of isolate this media form. And that therein, I think, is maybe the big difference, is that and this is why I think, the difference between the way the two of us tend to approach these things. I'm looking at this as a sort of, what are the pieces of this puzzle? I'm looking for pieces, you're looking for theories. And so we get a different sort of
it's the difference between to give ourselves a grandeur that we do not possess. It's the difference between Plato and Aristotle, but we'll talk about that in another episode. May I a very quick retort, or a very quick comment?
That was my takeaway. I'm signing out.
Well, very quick comment. You blew me away this episode, because I can't think I could certainly not do a better explanation, summary, and implied defense of Williams' methodology. And the key to what you're saying, and what you're saying Williams is that Williams is trying to present us a practical view of how the pieces interact and intermesh and interrelate. That's so important. It's so vital. Like, I don't have anything to say to that. I mean, that's just like, that's Williams. I think you really well summarized the affordances of Williams' theory, what Williams is doing at his best here. And we even saw that in the introduction to this piece, where in the first chapter, that's exactly what you just described is how he opens up the book, right? Mm-hmm. Here are all these pieces, but we can't understand how these pieces really function until we understand how they interrelate and what's putting them together in a very particular way. So, kudos to you. That's a brilliant summary, I think, in defense of Williams' position. I'm going to do a much more tepid defense, although I notice your largesse, because you are giving a very nice defense of McLuhan as well in your last statement. But I'll do a more tepid defense of McLuhan. Just as a foundational thinker, maybe this is just a statement, not so much of a statement in defense of McLuhan's system, but just maybe all this is just a recognition and an admiration for the important thing he did or he gave to media studies historically. And it's this. So Williams is the king, the crown prince, whatever, the monarch of thinking about media in terms of its various interrelations and its, the ways in which different causes and different practices are interrelated. You're not going to get any better on that. What McLuhan did, though, I think still remains signally important, because even up to 2023, when we talk about media, television or whatever WTF, whatever we're talking about, when we talk about media, we still tend to talk about the content of media. And for me, the medium is the message. What it signals is something like a Copernican, and maybe I have an exaggerated, maybe I have a daddy complex, and I have an exaggerated idea of this, because I think it's like something like has the importance of a Copernican turn in media theory, because McLuhan stands for a very important position still, i.e., and that position is, um, don't look at the content, look at the container.
Yeah,
So that's it. That's
I
my
would
type
just,
of defense.
I would say there's certainly value there's certainly value to understanding that the content is not the sole determinant of either the value or the meaning or the significance.
Or the
I think,
communication, right? Or the nature of the
yes,
communication.
but I will say that I'm in terms of a larger view of how media functions in society, I think Williams is more useful for my eye.
Well, Dr. Rapici, I don't expect Aristotle to agree with Plato now or ever. So I think we reached our terminus.
Well, Barry, it has been a lovely evening. I thank you, and I thank everybody else for listening or watching.
Like, share, like, share. What is our mantra? Like, share, dislike. No, you don't have to
Don't dislike. We're fragile.
Let's not encourage it. How about this? Here, what is the mantra? Like, share,
Subscribe.
Subscribe. Thank you, Dr. Rapici. Maybe we should do this. I heard someone do this weekend on a radio program, actually. Maybe we can do the critical media studies. Can I say this with a straight face? Let's do the critical media studies challenge.
Oh God.
If you're a listener, why don't you tell somebody else to check us out? And tell someone you like to check us out. And if you hate a person, tell them too. And you'll get revenge. If you hate us, make sure you tell a person you hate, because that way you'll get some surreptitious revenge on them, covert revenge on them. How about that? So share us with people you love or hate.
But share. I was never good at soliciting, so I'm gonna just let that be what it is. Barry, have a lovely evening. Thank you.
You too, sir.
And we'll pick this up next time.
Take care, sir. Take care.
Bye.